We can confirm the suspect in these 8 homicides is Shamar Elkins. He is believed to be the man responsible for this heinous act. I can tell you that 7 of the 8 children that were killed are believed to be his children. We are still working to determine a complete motive and understanding.
The last photo he posted showed him smiling. Easter Sunday, family around him, children in the frame. The kind of image people scroll past and feel a small pulse of warmth for: a father present, a family together, a man who looked like he still had something to hold on to. He wrote about being blessed. He used that word specifically, blessed. By the next morning, 8 children were dead. 3 years old, 5, 6, 7, 10, 11, his own blood, his own name on some of those birth certificates, gone before the Easter weekend was even fully over. 2 women had been shot. A neighborhood that had gone to sleep on a quiet Sunday night woke up to something it will never fully recover from. And somewhere in the wreckage of all of it, the question that always haunts these stories had already started forming, not just how, but what was building inside that house, inside that relationship, inside that man, long before Easter Sunday became the last morning those children ever knew. Welcome back to Blood Betrayal Files, or if this is your first time here, you just walked into the middle of one of the most devastating cases we have ever covered. Today we are going deep into the Cedar Grove killings, the morning that stole 8 children from Shreveport, Louisiana, and left a community asking questions that may never be fully answered. If you are not already subscribed, do it right now. You are going to need every part of this series, and drop in the comments where you are watching from tonight. I want to know who is sitting in the dark with me. All right, let us get back into it. Cedar Grove is not the kind of neighborhood that makes the news for good reasons very often. It sits on the northwest side of Shreveport, Louisiana, lived-in streets, close houses, the kind of community where people know each other's cars, where children ride bikes in the same block their parents grew up on, where front porches carry the weight of real life rather than the polished version of it. It is the kind of neighborhood where Easter Sunday matters, where families gather, where food gets made from scratch, where the holiday still has texture and meaning. On April 19, 2026, Easter Sunday, Shamar Elkins posted to social media. He was 31 years old. In the image, he looked like any man trying to hold his life together. There was a family around him. There were children. He wrote something about being blessed, about gratitude, about presence, the language of a man performing, maybe, or hoping, maybe, that the words would feel true if he said them out loud in the right format. People who knew him saw that post. Maybe they liked it. Maybe they scrolled past it. Maybe some of them thought he seemed better, seemed more grounded, seemed like things might be turning a corner for him. They were not turning, they were collapsing. Later reporting from law enforcement and people close to the family would fill in what was behind that image. Elkins had history, not the loud, obvious kind that makes strangers nervous, the quieter kind that lives inside walls, inside relationships, inside families who still hope the next week will be different from the last one. There was a weapons case from 2019. There were accounts from relatives describing worsening behavior, growing instability, something fracturing in the way he was moving through his days. There had been a separation, the kind that doesn't resolve cleanly, that leaves people suspended in emotional limbo, unsure whether the person they are separating from is dangerous or just broken. Records show Elkins had served in the Louisiana National Guard from 2013 to 2020. Whatever structure that gave him, whatever he built during those years, something had been eroding. Family members who spoke to reporters described mental health concerns. They described a man struggling in ways that had been visible to people close to him even when the public image looked normal. That is the gap this story lives in, the distance between what a man posts on Easter Sunday and what he is capable of by Easter Monday morning. The warning was there. It was not loud enough for the world outside that family to hear it until the damage was already done. It did not happen all at once. That is one of the details that makes the early hours of April 19 so hard to sit with. This was not a single explosion of violence in one room at one moment. It moved. It escalated. It crossed addresses, crossed streets, crossed from one family home to another, as if it had somewhere specific it was trying to go. The sequence, as authorities and later reporting pieced it together, began in the pre-dawn darkness of that Sunday night into Monday. The first scene was one address, violence connected to the domestic situation that had been building. 2 women were shot there. Christina Snow and Shaniqua Pug, names that will matter more in a moment, both survived, but their survival came with its own brutal cost. Gunshot wounds, surgery, hospitalization. One of them still fighting through memory problems weeks later, her body present but pieces of that night unreachable to her. From there, Elkins moved. He went to the house on West 79th Street, the house where the children were sleeping. 8 children, his children, most of them. Ages that should never appear in a crime report: 3 years old, 5, 6, 7, 10, 11. Siblings, cousins, the full web of a family that had been woven together across these 2 households, these 2 relationships, this one man's life. They were asleep, or maybe waking up, or maybe they heard something before it reached them. We do not know. What we know is that none of them walked out of that house that morning. 2 people did escape. A 12-year-old girl jumped from the roof. Later reporting confirmed at least one adult did the same. They made it out physically, though what they carry from that morning, no roof jump can put distance between them, and after the children, Elkins did not stop moving. He stole a vehicle, a carjacking in the middle of a neighborhood that was still sleeping, still unaware of the scale of what had just happened inside those walls. By the time police were responding to the first scene, Elkins was already in motion, driving away from Cedar Grove, pushing north, crossing into Bossier City. The pursuit ended there. Elkins died after a confrontation with police in Bossier City. No arrest, no handcuffs, no booking photo. Just over in the way that leaves every question unanswered and every person who needed something from that courtroom holding empty air instead. By the time the sun came up over Shreveport, what had started as violence inside a family had become one of the most devastating mornings that neighborhood had ever seen. We need to stop here, not to talk about the crime scene, not to talk about the investigation, not to talk about him. We need to stop here and say their names, because they deserve more than a body count in a headline, more than an age range in a police report, more than a detail in someone else's story. Jayla Elkins was 3 years old, 3. Old enough to recognize her father's face, old enough to know the smell of a familiar house, the sound of a familiar voice, not old enough for kindergarten, not old enough for any of what was supposed to come next. Shayla Elkins was 5, Braylon Snow was 5. 2 5-year-olds in the same house, in the same nightmare on the same morning. Kayla Pug was 6, Khedarrion Snow was 6. 2 6-year-olds who should have been waking up with Easter basket sugar still in their systems, arguing over whose chocolate was whose, existing in the completely ordinary way that children on the morning after a holiday exist. Layla Pug was 7. Markaydon Pug was 10, old enough to understand more, to carry more, to have already started building the version of himself he would become. Gone before that version had any chance to take shape. Sariahh Snow was 11, the oldest of the 8, 11 years old and the oldest child in a house that no adult could protect that morning. 7 of these children were Shamar Elkins's own. 1, a young relative described in later accounts as connected to the family circle, a cousin or nephew depending on the account, was caught in the same destruction. 7 were his. The last names tell the full story of the relationship structure here: Elkins, Pug, Snow. 3 names, 2 women, 1 man at the center of all of it. These children were siblings and half-siblings and cousins bound together by blood and by the specific geography of a family that existed across connected households. They knew each other. They played together. They shared birthdays and Easter Sundays and all the ordinary texture of childhood, and they died together. What does it take to look at a 3-year-old and choose that? What does it take to stand in a house full of your own children and decide this is the answer to whatever was breaking inside you? There is no framework for it. There is no explanation that provides anything close to relief. There is just the fact of it sitting there, immovable. And then there are the people who have to live with that fact forever. The mothers, the grandparents, the aunts and uncles who will spend the rest of their lives measuring time in before and after. The 12-year-old girl who jumped from a roof to survive and now has to carry what she saw on the way down. The community in Cedar Grove that will drive past that house for years. The people who liked that Easter post on Sunday and woke up Monday to understand what it actually was. Before we go any further, let us stop for a second. Not for the headline, not for the shock. For these children, Jayla, Shayla, Kayla, Layla, Markaydon, Braylon, Khedarrion, and Sariahh. 8 young lives that should have had birthdays ahead of them, school mornings, ordinary days, decades they were owed. If you believe stories like this should remember victims as people and not just as a tragedy, subscribe to this channel and stay with this series. Because remembering them fully, saying their names, sitting with their reality, that may be the only dignity left to give them now. Subscribe, stay. Christina Snow was the mother of 3 of the children who died that morning: Sariahh, Braylon, Khedarrion. Her children inside that house, taken from her, and she survived to have to process that. Days after April 19, she was still hospitalized, still dealing with the physical damage of the gunshot wound, still navigating memory gaps that the trauma had created. She was alive, but the version of alive she was living with was its own kind of unbearable. Shamar Pug was Elkins's wife. She was the mother of 4 of the children who died: Kayla, Layla, Markaydon, and Shayla. She had also been shot. She had also gone through surgery. She was also still in the hospital in the days following the killings. 2 women, connected to the same man through years of relationships and children, and the kind of interlocking family structure that forms when a person maintains more than one serious relationship across time. 2 women who had both survived something that had already taken 8 of their children. When reporting looked back at the period before April 19, a picture began to form, not of a stranger who appeared without warning, but of a relationship in deterioration that had been visible to people close to it. There had been a separation. There had been turmoil. Relatives described escalating instability, behavioral changes, a man becoming harder to read and harder to reach in the weeks and months before the killings. Elkins had a prior weapons case from 2019. Law enforcement confirmed he was known to them. None of that is a complete explanation. None of that resolves into something clean. But it does tell us that the danger was not invisible. It was not a bolt from nowhere. It was something that had been building pressure inside a family system that was already strained, already fractured, already holding onto hope in a situation that had moved past the point where hope was the only tool available. The hardest truth in stories like this is that the people living closest to the danger are often the same people with the fewest safe choices. The ones who know most clearly what is happening are the ones with the most to lose by acting on what they know: children, family ties, history, love that hasn't fully turned into fear, yet even when it probably should have. Christina Snow and Shamar Pug survived. They will spend the rest of their lives carrying what they lost. And the shape of their grief, a grief that includes the person responsible for it, is a kind that most of us will never have to fully understand. The hardest truth in stories like this is that the people living closest to the danger are often the same people with the fewest safe choices.
I don't know how to act because I've lost 8 parts of me because I loved each and every one of them like they were my own, and I took care of them like they were my own. I mean, he loved his kids. We would take them to the parks, out to eat, come outside, play with them. He loved his kids, he loved his wife. I just don't know what happened. I'm never gonna get to throw the football with him again. I'm never gonna get to hear him say, Dad, can I get this bag of chips? I'm never gonna hear my nieces say, Guncle, can I get a nana? Guncle, you going to work? Guncle, are you okay? I'm never gonna hear that again.
After the house on West 79th Street, Elkins moved fast. He stole a vehicle, a carjacking, in the strange, almost clinical language law enforcement uses to describe the act of taking something from someone by force in the middle of everything else that was already happening that morning. He left Cedar Grove behind him. He drove north. He crossed from Shreveport into Bossier City, which sits just across the Red River, close enough geographically that the distance feels almost absurd. The idea that he was fleeing from something that had already happened, as if putting miles between himself and West 79th Street would change the weight of what he had done. Police were already in pursuit. The chase moved through Bossier City until it ended, and it ended the way it ended, with Elkins dying after a confrontation with law enforcement. No arrest, no interrogation room, no moment where anyone could look him in the eyes and demand an answer to the only question that actually mattered. Why did you do this to your children?
At 6:17 a.m., our traffic units out on random patrol encountered or observed that particular vehicle traveling southbound on Interstate 49. The officers advised at 6:18 that they were crossing the Red River Bridge into Bossier City. At 6:20, officers received information that the children taken from the Harrison Street residence may be inside of the fleeing vehicle. 6:23 a.m., officers advised that they were exiting near Swan Lake area. 6:25 a.m. approximately, officers located the injured victims from the Harrison Street shooting.
That question does not have a courtroom now. It does not have a witness stand, does not have a defense attorney trying to construct a narrative, does not have a verdict. It has nothing. Just the evidence of what he did, the survivors who have to live with it, and the permanent silence where his explanation should have been. Investigators processed multiple scenes. The work of documenting everything, the first address, West 79th Street, the stolen vehicle, the pursuit, became a reconstruction project rather than a prosecution. When the person responsible dies before trial, the legal machinery shifts. It becomes about building a record rather than building a case, about making sure the truth is documented even if it will never be spoken from a witness stand. In the days that followed, the weight of what Shreveport had experienced began to settle into the community in the way these things always do, slowly, heavily, the full understanding arriving in waves rather than all at once. 8 children, Easter Sunday, a man who posted about being blessed and then returned before the weekend was over to cause the kind of damage you cannot undo. He was gone before most people had even processed what had happened, but the emptiness he left behind was only just beginning to show its full shape. 2 days after the killings, on April 21, 2026, the federal government filed a criminal complaint. Not against Shamar Elkins, he was already dead. This complaint was against a man named Charles Ford, 56 years old, and it introduced something that the story had not yet fully accounted for: the gun itself. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Western District of Louisiana charged Ford with being a felon in possession of a firearm and making false statements to federal agents in connection with the weapon Elkins used on April 19. As investigators traced the firearm backward through its history, the chain of possession became its own story. The gun had been purchased by someone else, a woman who said she had given it to Ford. From Ford, somehow, it had made its way to Elkins. Ford, according to prosecutors, had admitted during questioning that he had possessed the firearm. He had also told investigators that he believed Elkins took it. A prohibited person in possession of a firearm, a weapon that changed hands, moved through a network of people, and ended up used to kill 8 children, and wound 2 women before a sunrise in Shreveport. This is where the story expands beyond the violence of one morning into something wider and more systemic. Because what the Charles Ford charge asks, quietly but unmistakably, is this: what would have been different if that gun had never reached Shamar Elkins? That question does not assign the primary responsibility to anyone other than Elkins. He made those choices, he did those things. But it asks about the infrastructure around him, the people, the networks, the gaps in accountability that let a weapon move from one person to another until it arrived in the hands of someone who used it this way. Elkins had a prior weapons case from 2019. He had known troubles. He was not an unknown quantity to everyone around him, and yet the gun reached him. And now Charles Ford sits inside a federal criminal complaint as the case continues to unfold outward from the original morning, reaching into present-day 2026 with new legal proceedings and new questions about what could have been interrupted if something, anything, along that chain had held. Even after the shooter was dead, the case kept revealing something terrifying, that the damage was bigger than one morning and the failures around it did not die with him. Cedar Grove is still there, the houses are still there, the streets are still there. The porches and the corner stores and the yards where children used to play are all still exactly where they were on the morning of April 18, 2026, before any of this happened. The neighborhood survived. The geography survived, but 8 children did not. Jayla, Shayla, Kayla, Layla, Markaydon, Braylon, Khedarrion, Sariahh. Their names deserve to exist beyond the headline. They deserve to be said out loud slowly by people who were not there and had nothing to gain by knowing them, only something to honor by saying them anyway. Christina Snow is still recovering. Shaniqua Pug is still recovering. Somewhere, a 12-year-old girl is living in the aftermath of jumping from a roof to survive a morning that never should have happened. Somewhere in Cedar Grove, families are navigating grief that has no map, no instruction, no version of normal to return to. This story did not begin with sirens. It began inside relationships, inside silence, inside a man whose public image said blessed, while something entirely different was consuming him behind it. It moved through warning signs that were visible to some and invisible to others. It arrived on Easter Sunday with a post that now reads like a wound. And then it detonated inside the most private space that exists, a home, a family, and left a silence that no investigation, no federal charge, no documentation of scenes can fill. The case will continue in federal court. Charles Ford will face his charges. The legal record will continue to grow. But no courtroom proceeding touches what actually matters most in this story. 8 empty spaces where children should still be, 2 mothers living with injuries they will carry for the rest of their lives. A community trying to hold itself together around a grief that has no bottom. Long after the sirens faded, Cedar Grove was left with what families in cases like this always face: empty spaces where children should still be. And no matter what comes next, that is the part of the story that never changes. If this story stayed with you, if you believe that cases like this deserve to be told fully and slowly, and with the victims at the center, subscribe to Blood Betrayal Files right now. Leave a comment. Share this with someone who needs to understand what domestic violence actually looks like when it reaches its most devastating end. Every view, every subscriber, every person who stays to the final second tells this channel to keep telling these stories the way they deserve to be told. I will see you in the next one. Be safe out there.